Hello and welcome back to the Formula 1 chat. Today we're having a conversation about Formula 1 and whether the sport needs more teams. Now, in recent years we have heard lots of conversation about teams such as Audi, who will be joining in place of Alfa Romeo in 2026, but also teams like Andretti, like Porsche, interested in joining Formula 1. But today we're going to discuss what they would bring to the sport and what they would actually take away from the sport, so the pros and cons of having more teams on the grid. Now, an obvious start is that more teams adds more competition, of course, and more teams means that we get more drivers. So there are some really obvious cons. Should we start with very obvious pros? Should we start then with the more competition aspect? Why does another team add more competition to Formula 1?
I mean, if you take this season, for example, most of the last decade, 10, 15 years of Formula 1, it has been very much dominated by one team. First Mercedes, and now it looks like Red Bull and Max Verstappen are going to go on to dominate.
Yeah, before that Red Bull, before that Ferrari, so yeah.
I think at the moment we've probably got 3-4 teams up there, but usually at least one of them has a bad weekend. That's usually Ferrari. And then if another team has a bad weekend, you're then down to two teams fighting at the front, and there's such a massive gap between them and Red Bull. It's quite big. If you bring in another team who have a lot of money and have the resources to challenge, these big iconic brands which can compete on the same level, it would give them a chance to try and bridge those gaps.
Yeah, another aspect, of course, I would add to that is that if it is a big name in motorsport, such as a Porsche, such as a Toyota, do they come in with their own engine? We know Audi are apparently going to manufacture their own engine. If we get another new engine on the grid, more different engine manufacturers means there's another element that could change, especially with the big regulations in 2026. Now, looking at the teams rumoured, you would imagine if a Honda or Toyota were to join, it looks like Honda will continue to be a manufacturer for different teams rather than a team. But say a Toyota or Porsche was to join and they bring their own engine, then suddenly we're up to 6 different engine manufacturers. Maybe a new team does just absolutely smash the regulations. And if they do, then we can see a similar sort of story to what Brawn did in 2009, where they just jumped everyone. Yeah. So there are definitely the possibility something like that happens. Then of course we talk about drivers as well. Just to only have 20 seats is so difficult for young drivers to break into the sport and for old drivers to keep their seats when there's so much talent coming through. So adding another 2 seats. Well, if we look at this year, you'd probably have someone like Mick Schumacher, probably have someone like Liam Lawson could get seats in Formula 1. You would also have Antonio Giovinazzi in the conversation. They're drivers that aren't bad calibre at all. And you'd be looking... Well, Felipe Drugovich actually would probably have a seat as well. I think, or some of the IndyCar drivers may have jumped across.
The biggest kind of... I mean, you look at 2 years ago, Oscar Piastri, who tore apart F2, one of the best talents we've seen in a very long time in Formula 1, he had to take a year out because there just wasn't a seat available.
Yeah, and obviously, we're currently seeing that with Felipe Drugovich. We didn't see it with Mick Schumacher, but he's the first one in a while. Nick de Vries had to wait almost 4 years
for his shot in F1. The best young driver of their year, dominate the feeder series, but then have to take a year out or even more before they actually get a chance at the big league.
Yeah. So then some cons. We mentioned there are more drivers, more teams means more drivers, but is that necessarily a good thing? Because there definitely is a negative side to that. Does it make F1 less exclusive? Does it mean that actually it's no longer... It just becomes a little more easier? And while obviously 2 drivers isn't going to suddenly bring Mazepins and Sean Gelael into the sport... It does just make it that little bit easier. Not massively, but a little bit easier, a little less exclusive. It's no longer the top 20 drivers in the world, it's now the top 24. And as we saw with, if you think back to the mid-2010s, we had like Roberto Merhi and Will Stevens getting in the sport. They're drivers that shouldn't have touched Formula 1 with a barge pole. Felipe Nasr was never anything to, watch. He was something to watch, but he was never anything to talk about. They're drivers that shouldn't have ever really been in the sport. And we saw that a lot back through the mid-2000s as well, where more teams got involved that really shouldn't have been there. And that is, I think, a big fear, that if we open the doors up to more teams, make it easier to access Formula 1, do you reach a point where someone with a billionaire out there just decides that without the resource to properly fund a team, just spunk some cash on a team to have a bit of fun?
Well, yeah, but and that's the thing. There's two problems, I think, with... if someone rich came in, A, would they have the resources? Because we said that they could provide a challenge at the front and make it interesting, but could they have the resources to go on and dominate it? If they had enough money and they could convince enough people to go across, that would be interesting. I also think you look at some iconic names we've already got in Formula 1. I think Williams is the best example. Iconic name. Everyone's heard of Williams.
Yeah.
But they don't have the financial ability that a rich billionaire would. So if he came in, he suddenly, or whoever they are, comes in, they could completely knock teams like Williams. Because if you're an iconic brand, but you haven't got the money, you could be completely knocked off the shelf
I do think
some random rich person.
I do think more competition would... I think that's why F1 teams are against it. Because obviously more competition is bad for them. They get less prize money, there's more chance they slip down the order. And for Williams, if they're suddenly the 21st and 22nd on the grid, they're not even in the top 20 anymore. And there's another 2 drivers ahead of their drivers. Not that Williams are obviously the bottom team, really. It rotates around every week. But for Haas, who rarely score points anyway, and Williams, teams like that, would they think about pulling out? I don't think Williams would, because they've got that strong brand. And they can get capital investment quite easily.
They've had money troubles for ages in the rich energy days, the Ural-Kali days.
Would Gene Haas call it a day?
Maybe.
I think Haas are the easiest in for another team. That's the problem now. F1's become so exclusive with that £600 million buy-in that actually the only opportunity teams have to get involved is to buy other teams. Yeah. That's how Audi are getting in. How have we got to a point where Audi want to join Formula 1 but are priced out of it? They have to go and buy a different team. And I think we'll see the same if Andretti want to reach Formula 1. They're either going to have to pair up with Haas or purchase Haas off of Gene Haas.
The American links there. But
yeah, could be interesting little Haas-Andretti combo.
But obviously that's the massive thing, the FIA. They cannot, whatever happens, they cannot afford to drive out existing teams. Because it will look very bad for the sport if you start to see teams drop out because these maybe richer brands and more notable brands are coming in.
But I don't think that's necessarily a negative. I think it's a bigger negative that they're driving away such reputable brands by making it so impossible to join. I mean, Porsche should be in Formula 1.
Yeah, but it depends who you drive away. If you drive away Haas, maybe not. But you never know who. There's some big names in Formula 1 who would be very.
It would
unhappy.
Obviously be a massive shame to lose someone like a Williams, but for me, I think I want to see more competition. I want to see more teams in the grid because I think a 22, 24 driver grid, so a 11 or 12 team grid would work well still. So I don't think that's necessarily a massive problem. I'd love to see more drivers. Obviously, they'd have to work out the point, and I think there is a discussion to be had about whether they should increase the number of points anyway. Because obviously, we've not had a massive change to the point system in years, and now that every race seems to be one where everyone finishes, it makes it practically impossible for the little guys to score points. So maybe they do increase the points down to maybe 12th place. I saw someone theorise maybe down to 15th, which could work. They do that in... What series do they do that in? IndyCar, they give points to everyone, which I think is insane. MotoGP goes down to 15, but then they have a lot more riders. So maybe if you increase the amount of teams, you increase the point system, that would bring the incentive to those Williams, those Haas that you talk about maybe dropping out. But for me, I don't think we'll ever get to the point where we have 15 teams. The paddocks don't work for that. The tracks aren't small enough. I mean, imagine Monaco with 30 cars. They'd literally be in just one long train.
Formula 3.
Exactly.
I mean, they only work because the cars are tiny.
Well, and also
half the time, in that one, so it's fine.
Exactly, half of them don't even get to turn one. Yeah. So I think the difference, obviously, with Formula 1 is it's so difficult. I think I'd love to see more teams introduced. I hope the FIA steps in and doesn't allow F1 to F1's greed to stop other teams being able to join. And I hope they actually try and convince them to lower that investment price. But equally, there should be a high price, a high buy-in. 600 mil is probably a bit much, but 500, 400, you lower that a little bit. I think you still negate the weird teams that we used to see. Like, who are the ones that had like that? Oh, Super Aguri. I remember them, their red and white livery. They're like around in the early 2000s, I want to say. They just signed some young Japanese drivers who were tragic. Just absolutely tragic. And I'd be really... I think if you make it a big enough buy-in, it'd be very difficult for an idiot to go and just purchase an F1 team.
I feel like this all kind of links very well with a video we did a few weeks ago about F1 being sport a spectacle over sport.
A couple months ago, actually.
If you do want to go see that, then go check it out.
No, we're linked in the top right of the screen if I've remembered.
Yeah, but I think it is interesting to see how F1 is going to develop, because you feel that if we don't see more teams, we don't see bigger brands join the sport, then where is it going to develop to in the next few years?
Yeah, I think Audi joining in 2026 will be an interesting element, especially since they'll bring another powertrain. I think Ford coming on as an engine manufacturer could be really interesting as well, because they don't make F1 engines, so that's gonna be interesting. So it's gonna be interesting to see how whether someone like McLaren decides to switch engine, especially if Audi bring a fast package. We could see McLaren go and get an Audi engine rather than the current Mercedes engine. So that could be decent.
I think that Audi will be our first kind of big teller, because if they come in and they start challenging, quite decently in terms of for the points paying position to maybe even push on furthermore, that will say to us that maybe more teams in Formula 1 isn't a bad idea.
So how many teams do you think is perfect then? What would be that perfect number?
I think 12's the maximum. 26 is a weird number. 13 teams, that's not nice.
What about 15?
No, too many. I'd say 12.
Yeah.
But 11's fine.
That's the max we've ever gone to, isn't it? 12?
Yeah.
I think they've had more than that on the grid at a time. So, I would love to see more teams in Formula 1.
Yeah.
I think it would just make it more interesting and give opportunities to drivers that deserve it. Because there are some drivers in history and drivers right now that haven't had a shot or haven't ever been given that shot and probably deserve to have that opportunity, but alas. And then you see drivers like Mazepin who do get that opportunity. So but that's the thing. We speak about how actually a new team could, by lowering that buy-in, you could get a team that come in, someone who's not really experienced and just lets his mates go in the car. But Mazepin still got in, given the current systems.
Yeah.
So for me, that shows that there is still flaws in the system. So it doesn't matter really how exclusive you try to make it. If someone's got enough money, they could definitely get to F1.
Yeah.
Equally, Mazepin did have some time, because you've got to get a super license. You can't just drive an F1 for a laugh.
I mean, in terms of teams joining, obviously we saw that out in 26. When's the next regs change after 26?
It's not announced yet, but you'd imagine 2030, 2032 would be the sensible
sort of. If you're a new team joining, you want to join a regs change, you're not even miles behind.
Do you think sustainability is an issue for F1 right now? Do you think that actually, while F1's in a boom period, there will still be some apprehension from other teams, because they'll look at it and go, well, if sustainability rules come in and apply across Europe and the rest of the world, where actually you can't be emitting this much carbon into the atmosphere, is the future of Formula 1 safe? Potentially teams will look at that.
Unless they find an alternative to the way Formula 1 is.
They've got to become carbon neutral, of course, and lower the emissions, not mainly from travel. Not just from racing, but mainly from travel, because that is their biggest. The logistics of F1.
50 race long calendar every year.
Yeah, maybe don't jet from try and make it logistically more possible rather than jetting from place to place where it doesn't make much sense. But yeah, that'll be interesting. That'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll get more teams in Formula 1 as a sort of a closing point, because just on the topic of travel and stuff, obviously I was just thinking about Bahrain. It has been announced, so we'll talk about this. It's a bit of a side topic, but it is relevant to Formula 1 right now. Bahrain and Saudi will be on Saturdays next year, apparently, according to a lot of reports. How do you feel about that as an F1 fan? How does it feel having a race on a Saturday?
I'm not on board with it.
No?
I just think I don't know. I'd like things that stay the same. I like having the weekend structure. If you practice on the Friday, you qualify on the Saturday, and you race on the Sunday. Races on obviously, I know that it'll be different times in different places in the world, but racing on a Saturday, it's just a bit weird. Yeah,
I agree. I think my biggest issue is there's no justifiable reason. I mean, the reason they gave was Ramadan, which, if that was a genuine reason, I'd be completely behind, because I think if we're going to a country which the main religion is Islam, then we should be respecting those beliefs. However, Ramadan is every day of the week. Every single day of Ramadan, you have to abide by the same rules. So why do they need to do it there's no difference between a Saturday and a Sunday, basically. So.
It's a bit weird, because if that's the reasoning they've used, then what's the real reasoning for that?
But also, if that is a problem, why not move it? it would make more logistical sense to move it, because you could run Australia first round of the season and then go into the European leg and then have your Asian leg towards the end of the season and put Bahrain and Saudi in with them, which makes much more sense.
It does raise a question of why they're actually doing it.
Yeah.
Not accusing them of anything, but it is a little weird.
Yeah, it doesn't really make much sense to me.
No.
I think they more just want to create a thing. Oh, that these two races are the only ones that run on a Saturday. Maybe. There's no way of knowing without asking Stefano Domenicali, and I don't think he's going to come on the show.
No.
But if you do, Stefano, hit us up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's everything for today, though. Yeah. We've had an interesting discussion. I'm sure there will be lots of discussion opened up in the comments below. So if you have got any thoughts on any of the topics we've discussed today, then please do make sure to get involved down there. If you are new to the channel, make sure to leave a like and, of course, subscribe. It massively helps us out. We don't really have a goal for this channel at the moment, but if you were to subscribe, that would massively help us, as it just shows us that you're enjoying what we're making. And give on the comments, as I say. It'll be interesting to hear from you guys. That is all from us today, though. Thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.